Hey, Alban, how are you, man?
Hey, Pat, how's it going?
It's going well, and it's not just you and me here. There's thousands of people watching right now. If you want to wave to everybody and say hello.
Hey, everybody. So glad that everyone could be here.
Yeah, why don't you take a minute and tell everybody who you are and what do you do?
Sure. My name is Alban Brooke. I'm the head of marketing at Buzzsprout, and my job is to help you make podcasting easy for you to start one. Yeah.
Awesome. We have a lot of podcasters watching right now, and a lot of future podcasters watching. And even if people aren't podcasters, knowing about podcasting and how it's growing is really important, because a great way to grow and find new audiences is to obviously be a guest on other podcasts, and you can sort of ride that wave. And that wave is huge. It's still growing. What are you seeing from your perspective? Because you have access to all this data, you know a lot of things that are happening in the industry right now. What are some trends that are happening in terms of growth? Are we still like kind of flatlined, or are we growing massively? Where are we at with just the industry right now?
Man, I mean, to put it in context, Pat, I think we first met in like 2014 when there were something like 60,000 podcasts. And now we're over 2 million podcasts in the world. And it's always funny to me that there's people in 2014 that thought they missed the boat because there were already 60,000. And I still feel like we're in that same spot. There are 2 million, but there are so much growth. We're still seeing really strong growth. And a lot of the people who maybe during the quarantine said, I want to start a show, a lot of them have started to drop out. And so there's a lot of listeners who are kind of trying to find what's the next show, because maybe one of their older creators aren't really sticking up with the podcast anymore.
Okay. So there is a little bit of a, oh, let's give it a shot and try it out kind of thing. And then a lot of people drop off. So for the podcasters out there, how do we make sure that we continue to stay there and show up for our audiences?
So I think consistency is a big piece of it. I mean, you did the YouTube challenge where you went live every day for a year. And I love that kind of mentality, because the more that you're showing up for your audience, the more that you're becoming a part of their life, a habit to watch your show, you are going to get better and better at creating content. And so the podcasts that we see that stick with it week after week for 10 weeks, as soon as they hit that 10-week point, it's really a game changer for whether or not they stick with it long term. So what I always tell people, if you're going to start, just commit to releasing an episode every week for 10 weeks. And already you're going to be in kind of this rare group of really roughly like 600,000 podcasts are the ones who are actually have released 10 episodes and are still active.
I like that perspective. You know, I've heard something similar in the world of YouTube, where you just got to get through your first 100 videos, and producing 100 videos is a lot, right? Producing a podcast is a little bit easier for sure. And I love that. So 10 episodes, get out there, get in there. The more you just force yourself to do it, you know, you're going to be a mess at the start. As I heard John Lee Dumas, a famous podcaster, once say, you got to be a disaster before you become the master, right? So you just got to get through it. I think I really love that advice. But, you know, a lot of people, whether they've reached 10 episodes or not, they might still feel like, well, their listenership isn't quite as big as it could be. I'd love to hear from your perspective and your connection to, you know, hundreds of thousands of podcasters. What's working for growth today? How do we grow our listenership with our podcast?
So there's a few different ways. One that I've seen lately that I've been really intrigued by is people who are using these high growth channels like TikTok, Instagram Reels, sometimes even YouTube, and they're leveraging those to get a lot of exposure. And then they tie that exposure back to the podcast. The magical thing about podcasts is we control the medium, and we are connected to our audience no matter what. You know, people subscribe, they get the episode. So what I've seen work is people are making TikTok videos that every once in a while one goes viral. And at the end of their episodes, they say, or their TikTok video, they say, for the full story, come on over to the podcast. I just shared a case study about this, about someone who's getting thousands of new podcast listeners based on one viral TikTok video. And there's people replicating this on Reels. Joe Rogan obviously did this with YouTube by putting everything on YouTube with clips. And as soon as a few of those start gaining traction, he was always drawing people back to his podcast, which he fully controlled.
That's actually how I found Joe Rogan, was not through watching one of his 2-hour long interviews. It was actually through a clip about something specific. And of course, the algorithms are there to help you, right? The algorithm on YouTube, the algorithm on TikTok, the algorithm on Instagram Reels. We're very lucky because we have an expert in IG Reels and TikTok helping us. Kenya
Oh,
Kelly,
that's
she's
awesome.
a part of the conference here. So that'll be really exciting. Okay, so that's one way to do it. And are you saying that we take a clip from our podcast, then put it in a vertical format of sorts, just what is it, TikTok, Instagram Reel, 60 seconds, like a really high value moment, and then drive people to the rest of our podcast, get them interested? Or is it just, hey, show up on camera and tell them about it? What is actually the video that we're posting on there?
Whenever people are asking me about different social media platforms, I really always encourage them, like, find the one that you understand and create the type of content that that platform wants. For Instagram Reels and for TikTok, it's kind of these very catchy, quick stories is what I've seen work really well. So there's a podcast that I saw do this. They have a podcast about disasters. And so they just start telling the story, and they tell the 30-second version of it. And they say, if you want the full story, come check out the podcast. And they were doing it. They're getting a few thousand views per reel until one took off and started getting hundreds of thousands. And all of a sudden they saw this massive spike in listenership.
Wow. I need to hook up with that podcast because I have a lot of disasters I can talk about, that's for sure. But that's a great idea. So if you're watching this and you're like, how do I grow on Instagram and TikTok? You'll find that Kenya Kelly, when she talks about this, you don't need to be like I'm imagining, let's see, how can I set this up? I'm imagining like putting this up and be like, hey guys, listen to my podcast. Like, that's not going to work very well, right? I like showing a little bit of a clip. And you're right, those stories, man. Stories, I'm always telling podcasters, story. That's how you hook people in. That's how you get people interested to start the story on one of these channels and then have people want to finish it on the podcast. Really, really smart. I love that. Okay, that's a great tactical thing. What about what else is working out there for growing your listenership? Because and actually the big principle here is you want to find audiences that don't know you, right? I think a lot of people think, oh, I'm going to repurpose the podcast and put it onto Twitter and onto Instagram, on my feed. It's like, those people already know you exist. I think a big principle here is, how do we get in front of other and newer people? Do you have any strategies on how else we might be able to do that?
So few that have always worked are guesting on other podcasts. Including your podcast on blogs. I've seen that work really well for us. So if we write a blog post about a topic that maybe we've already covered. So, example for SPI would be you do an affiliate marketing blog post, and then you include your affiliate marketing episodes on that page. It really helps people understand. They may find it through Google. Again, we're leveraging an algorithm to get exposure to new people. And then we're saying, hey, if you're interested in affiliate marketing, why don't you check out SPI? And here's the episode. And so you can immediately get that value and realize this podcast is probably something I'd be really interested in. Like you kind of said this, you alluded to this, you can't be doing a dance video on TikTok and expect people to want to come to your podcast that's about golden doodle dogs or something. Teach what you know and what your audience is looking for. And then
you mean to do that?
I didn't read that off your shirt.
Dude, that was awesome.
And teach what you know, and then go ahead and then tell people, I'm still teaching more of this. I'm providing more value on the podcast. You can't do the bait and switch, or that will only work, one time. It's not going to be a long-term sustainable marketing channel.
That's great advice. I love that. I think a lot of us podcasters or content creators in general, we've always taken the if you build it, they will come approach, right? And it sounds like that's just not going to work anymore. I mean, you hear about the stories still because once in a blue moon, it happens. And the reason you hear it is because it doesn't happen very often, right? It gets talked about, it gets like on the news or whatever. But you have to work for it. You have to market. What about like paid acquisition? Is that a thing? Is that something we could as podcasters think about to grow?
There's a way to do that right, and there's a way to do it wrong. So the right way to do it is advertising in podcasting apps, Overcast, Pocket Casts, Castbox, a lot of podcast apps. There's blog posts on the Buzzsprout blog of all the different apps that you can advertise in. Because those are people who are already listening to shows, then they click on the ad and they start subscribing right there.
Right.
The way to not do it right is to put it on Facebook and Google and hope that people will download a podcast app and start listening. I have only seen people lose a lot of money doing that. I really have never seen anybody successfully grow a podcast that way.
That makes sense. I mean, if I'm on Facebook or Twitter, I'm not going to be, unless it's a really good post, convinced enough to click away, to then open up my podcast app, to then click play, to then listen, to then consider whether or not I should. There's so much friction there, right? So reducing the friction is great. I love the idea of going on to apps that already have podcast listeners on them. I think if you're going to pay for ads, I think a great way to do it too is to pay another podcaster to give you a shout out, right? You could be the sponsor of somebody else's show. And if you consider maybe not the biggest shows, because that might cost a lot of money, there's a lot of smaller podcasts that are growing quite fast that are probably looking to make money, and you can work together with them and they'll help you grow too at the same time. I think that's really smart. Okay, so thank you for that. To finish off here, let's just talk about some more of that burnout, because as content creators, we got to keep creating. However, if we create too much or too fast and we're just kind of sinking underwater, we can get burned out. Yeah. How do you reduce the overwhelm when it comes to content creation, specifically as a podcaster?
So I think that what you want to do is you want to set a game plan for something that actually is sustainable. I think a lot of people hear the stories of some of the most successful content creators. They hear John Lee Dumas started Entrepreneur on Fire by doing a daily show, and they think, I'll do the same thing. That does not work for most people, especially if you've got a full-time gig or maybe you have kids at home. So find what is the content calendar that can fit into my life that I'll still be excited to do. So for a lot of people, that's once a week, maybe doing a 30-minute episode. And then you've got to make sure that there's some portion of your time dedicated 100% to marketing. Because you said it, like, everyone wants to believe in Field of Dreams marketing. If you build it, they will come. It doesn't work. So make sure you won't get burned out. If people start listening, you'll be more excited. But to get people listening, you need to have some time carved out for marketing your podcast.
How much time? Like, how much would you need? What amount of time would you need to get the biggest bang for your buck?
You can always keep investing more and more and keep getting more out of the marketing. But I think at the beginning, put an hour aside, an hour total for the week, and say, this is going to be focused on marketing for my show. So maybe if you're big into TikTok, you spend that hour making your TikTok video and engaging with people on TikTok. If you're really into Instagram, it's an Instagram reel. If you're on YouTube, it's actually cutting up the video that you've created, editing it down a little bit, and getting that on YouTube. So give yourself an hour and pick the one social media platform that you know best. If it's LinkedIn that you're on all the time, work with LinkedIn, write posts for LinkedIn, and always tie them back to the content you created on the podcast that week. And remember, the average podcaster is really only getting about 37 plays per episode. Those are the new podcasts. That's what they're getting on average. So once you start hitting numbers like that, know you're on the right track. We all hear the numbers that people have stayed with it for years and years are getting tens of thousands of listens. But in the beginning, each individual listener you add is another milestone on your podcasting journey.
That's so good. Do you mind if I ask you one more follow-up question to that?
Yeah.
So let's say you have 37 listens. I love that reframe. I think that we need to realize that those are real human beings. How do we engage with those 37 listeners? How do we actually connect with them and make contact with them so that we can learn more about them, so that we can understand them better, so we can attract more people like them, so we can build super fans? How do we engage with those 37 listeners?
Well, one of the superpowers you have when you're small is that you actually can engage with everybody. And if you want to pretend you're a massive podcast, then everybody will feel like they won't matter, so they won't reach out. But what you do is you ask people to reach out and then you honor it when they do. So people send you an email, mention it on the podcast so that they know, wow, I reached out one time and I got a response. They responded to my email. Somebody post something about your podcast on social, make sure you like and thank them for sharing it. I can't tell you how many very large podcasts I've shared something, then they respond to me, and I realize, oh, it mattered to the person on the other end. And it only encourages me more and more to engage with the podcast and to share more about them later on. So engage with everybody. If you get reviews, read them on the air and thank the person for the review. Really elevate your super fans so that everybody else knows that they actually matter to you, so that they aren't confused and thinking, he has tens of thousands of listeners, he probably would never care about my story.
You said it better than I could, Alvin. Thank you for that. I think that's perfect, and a perfect way to lead into our next session here at Audience Driven. So thank you so much for your time today. Buzzsprout, thank you for what you do, what you guys do, and how you make podcasting easier for all of us. So I appreciate it very, very much. Thank you.
Well, thank you, Pat, and to everybody. I hope you have an amazing conference. And if you ever have any questions, feel free to reach out. We'd love to help with your podcast.
Awesome. Thanks, man.